When a national leader dies, you expect public ceremonies. You expect solemn crowds. But in North Korea, people collapse in the streets, wailing and tearing at their clothes in displays of absolute, uncontrolled hysteria. It's easy to watch footage like this and assume it's all an act, a mandatory performance to avoid punishment. But the reality is far more unsettling. For many of these citizens, this grief is entirely real. Achieving this level of psychological dominance requires a deep, systemic rewiring of the entire social environment. The Kim dynasty rose through a meticulously planned heist, a multi-generational project to seize control of an entire nation's reality. At the end of the Second World War, two American colonels spent about 30 minutes choosing a previously meaningless line on a map, the 38th parallel, to divide the Korean peninsula. The Soviets controlled the north, and they needed a reliable communist proxy to run it. They chose a famous guerrilla fighter named Kim Il-sung, or at least they claimed they did. A bizarre CIA investigation later concluded that the original Kim had actually died years earlier, and the Soviets blackmailed a criminal into assuming his identity so they could control him. Modern historians consider that imposter theory to be nonsense, confirming Kim was the real deal. But the fact that Western intelligence took the theory so seriously highlights the deep paranoia and deception that surrounded the regime from day one. That paranoia calcified into outright hatred during the Korean War. United States Air Force bombing campaigns leveled nearly every target in the north. By the time an armistice was signed, an estimated 80, the sheer scale of the devastation wiped the slate clean, creating a psychological vacuum that left the surviving population highly vulnerable to a radical new narrative. Emerging from a war that failed to reunify the peninsula, Kim Il-sung urgently needed a scapegoat to survive. The failure of the communist invasion had severely damaged his prestige among his own ranks. When he traveled to Moscow in the summer of 1956, rival factions of Soviet and Chinese-aligned communists seized the opportunity. They criticized his growing ruler cult and arbitrary punishments, planning to confront him upon his return in what became known as the August Faction Incident. But Kim had cultivated immense loyalty as a nationalist hero. He shouted his critics down at the party conference, and over the following months, dozens of opposing leaders vanished. Most were sent to hard labor camps or shot and buried in unmarked graves, while a handful faced highly publicized show trials. By executing anyone who dared to question him, Kim dismantled the internal factions. He eliminated political rivals and destroyed any competing narratives, leaving himself as the sole author of the nation's truth. With absolute control, Kim introduced a guiding principle called juche. On paper, it translates to self-reliance, emphasizing economic independence. In practice, it operates as a psychological weapon, insulating the population from outside ideas and demanding absolute worship of the state. The personality cult surrounding Kim escalated to severe extremes. It became a criminal offense to write over a photograph of the leader, or even to fold a newspaper that happened to have his image printed on it. To rebuild the shattered economy, the state launched the Trolleyma, or Flying Horse campaign. It relied on massive propaganda drives, organizing workers into competing teams to meet exhausting state-mandated production quotas. This flowchart visualizes how the system fed on its own fear. Regional officials who failed to meet agricultural targets were punished. To protect themselves, they lied, sending artificially inflated reports of crop yields up the chain of command, which the central government then logged as massive food surpluses. The state then seized actual food from the farmers based on those exaggerated numbers. By prioritizing a fabricated utopian spreadsheet over objective reality, the regime starved its own people, triggering a hidden famine in the mid-1950s that killed hundreds of thousands. While the economy was being artificially engineered, the society was being brutally categorized. In 1957, the regime launched Songbun, a rigid caste system that sorted every citizen based strictly on their family's perceived political loyalty. This pyramid diagram visualizes the three tiers of North Korean society. At the top sits the loyal core, comprising about 28% of the population. In the middle is the wavering class at 45%, and at the bottom is the heavily persecuted hostile class, making up the remaining 27%. The state maintains a file on every adult to track their status. If you are placed in the lower tiers, doors simply close. Your songbun dictates where you can live, who you are allowed to marry, what hospitals you can enter, and even how much food you receive from the state. A missed quota or a careless word can drop your entire family down the scale. The system effectively weaponizes daily survival, forcing every citizen to play the role of a flawless, devoted patriot just to stay alive. To maintain the illusion that this system was a paradise, the regime had to hide anything that contradicted their narrative. The capital city of Pyongyang was heavily curated to present an image of absolute perfection to the outside world. Visitors to the country began noticing a chilling pattern. Despite the nation having recently survived a brutal war, outsiders rarely saw a single person who was physically disabled, scarred, or mutilated on the streets. Anyone whose physical appearance undermined the myth of a healthy, thriving communist utopia was quietly removed from public view and vanished into the countryside. The state officially claimed that blindness and deafness were failures of the pre-revolutionary world. To keep that illusion spotless, they had to systematically erase the visible reality of human suffering. For those who couldn't or wouldn't maintain the performance, the state built an elaborate network of prisons. Borrowing heavily from Stalinist gulags, these hard labor camps punish the individual while simultaneously broadcasting a warning to the rest of the population. The ever-present threat of disappearing into the mountains acts as a psychological engine, guaranteeing the compliance of everyone left behind. Bizarre laws and mandated grief function as the daily maintenance required to prevent the central deception from collapsing. The Kim dynasty's greatest crime was the successful theft of a nation's reality. They managed to engineer a psychological prison so complete that its walls are often invisible to those inside.